Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. In this video, I'm going to be looking at the week starting on Monday, July the 29th, 2024. So in this video, I'm going to start off by having a blow-by-blow account of what I see as being the main astrological events this week. In some respects, it's not a great deal happening, though there is a new moon right at the end of the week, and probably the main aspect is Venus square Uranus, and I will be looking at that aspect. In fact, that is my main focus. So what I will be doing is I will be considering the timing of this Venus square Uranus and people who have had or have Venus square Uranus in their horoscopes. And I will be looking at a few Venus square Uranus events. And having done that, I'm going to be looking at the I Ching for this week. So I will cast an I Ching. I ask the question, what is the week starting on Monday, July the 29th going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of the video, and then I will provide an answer, and I will divide my answer into 4 sections: general, money, career and business, and relationships. And just a reminder, if you don't want to watch the I Ching video, well, you don't have to, because if you don't watch it, it doesn't apply to you, because it only applies to people that actually watch it. That's why I ask, what is the week going to be like for those watching the I Ching? I don't ask what it's going to be like for everyone. It just is about those watching the I Ching video. Now, if you happen to like this video as you're watching it, I would of course be very grateful if you were to indicate that you liked it. And if you're not subscribed, of course, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. Okay, so let's start off by looking at what's going on this week. Now, as far as the pictures are concerned, that is a picture of President Richard Nixon, and that is a picture of him during his resignation speech, and he resigned on August 8th, 1974. So that would be very nearly 50 years ago. So 50 years ago he resigned, and on August 2nd, August 2nd, 1923, which is Friday. Friday is August 2nd. That was when Warren Harding died. So, this is a time of year, early August, when a couple of presidents have died, have resigned. So I'll be talking about that a bit later. But anyway, so as far as the positions of the planets over the course of a week are concerned, so the week starts with the moon in Taurus, fairly late Taurus, and you can see that the moon is making a conjunction to Uranus, and then it makes a conjunction to Mars and Jupiter. So beginning of a week, we've got moon conjunct Mars, moon conjunct Jupiter. So it might be quite an energetic time at the beginning of a week. So sort of Monday, Tuesday, we've got the moon moving into Gemini, and so that's important because moon just picks up on the fact that Mars is in Gemini and Jupiter is in Gemini. And so at some point we're going to have moon on the Mars-Jupiter conjunction. And so, it's a very wide Mars-Jupiter conjunction at the moment. Okay, it's around about 8 degrees apart, but there will be a certain Mars-Jupiter feel, I think, to the beginning of a week. People will have a lot of energy. There'll be lots of things they want to do, but there may be a temptation to put too much energy into things and to over-assert ourselves. So I think that is a possibility we have to be aware of. Then, as we move into the week, the Sun which is now in Leo, starts to move towards a quintile with Uranus. So Sun quintile Uranus is going to be more energy, quite an energetic feel to it as July comes to a close. I think that some of us are going to feel that we have got to do something to create an effect. We are going to really want to create an effect. However we create that effect is kind of up to us, but I think it's going to be important. We're going to feel that on its own things just aren't good enough, that we actually have to push things a little. And so with that Sun quintile Uranus, we're going to be very energized, and perhaps our energy is going to be slightly contrived because we're going to want action, we're going to want things to happen, but we might just feel that on our own, just using the normal approach, we can't make it happen. So we might have to be slightly exaggerated in our behavior. At least that's going to be the temptation. Then as we move into August, August the 2nd, we have Venus square Uranus. Venus in Leo square Uranus in Taurus. Now, I think this aspect, it could actually be problematic because Venus will be at 26 Leo, Uranus will be at 26 Taurus. In other words, Venus is going to be square Taurus convey Uranus. Venus is going to be square Uranus, which is going to be conjunct Algol. So all of the problems of Uranus conjunct Algol. You remember Uranus was conjunct Algol when we had the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Mars was, we had Mars conjunct Uranus then. Now we've got Venus square Uranus conjunct Algol, with Uranus being conjunct Algol. So it may not be about Venus. Venus could just be about a triggering planet. So it may not be about Venus being the planet of love. It just may be Venus as a detonator. So Venus as a detonator may create explosive events. That is possible. So I think overall, we have to be careful around Friday, August the 2nd is problematic. It's also the day of France's Mars return. If you take the storming of the Bastille as the start date of France, France has its Mars return on Tuesday, and we've got Venus square Uranus. So things might not work out as planned, and certainly relationships may not work out as planned. Anything can happen, for better or for worse, I suppose. But we mustn't make assumptions about other people, and we certainly mustn't make assumptions also about money, because Venus can be the planet of money. So things might happen which require us to spend money that we didn't realize we had to spend. I suppose it can work the other way. I suppose Venus square Uranus can be about suddenly having a financial opportunity. That is possible. But I do think that this Venus square Uranus needs to be treated with a certain amount of caution. And I will be talking about Venus square Uranus in further detail in a moment. And then right at the end of the week, we've got a new moon. New moon obviously in Leo. As it's right at the end of a week, I don't think I really want to talk about the new moon in much detail in this video. Suffice it to say that the new moon, it represents a new cycle. The moon is no longer waning; it's a new beginning, and so there could be a certain sense of one thing ending, something new coming into play. And that new moon, we should remember, is taking place just before Mercury goes retrograde. So Mercury turns retrograde, I think, on August the 5th. So we've got a new moon on on August the 4th, and Mercury turns retrograde on August the 5th. The new moon is, by the way, at around 13 Leo. So that is something that we need to consider when you do have a new moon at the same time as Mercury going retrograde. That can be a bit of a problem. But I think I want to talk about that a bit later in another video. So let's now consider Venus square Uranus. So the standard view of Venus square Uranus would be about exciting, unstable relationships. That's what it's about, isn't it? I mean, Venus is the planet of love, Venus planet of relationships. You put Uranus on next to it, and it creates instability and excitement. Isn't that how it works? So you might say that if someone has Venus square Uranus, they might have perhaps lots of different relationships, or their relationships may be in some way unstable, and there may be plenty of drama there. And I mean, I think that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Though I would have thought that Venus square Uranus might differ somewhat depending on whether the holder of the Venus square Uranus is a male or a female. Obviously, if you're a woman with Venus square Uranus, it's your Venus. Venus is a female planet, so you're not likely to project it to any great extent. So a woman with Venus square Uranus might be a woman who might value her independence, because Uranus is about independence. And because they value their independence, that might mean that they find it difficult to make commitments to any one person. They might want to make commitments. There's Venus, but Uranus keeps interfering, saying Uranus is sort of saying, well, no, this is not what we want. We want to be free. So there could be a positive side in a female chart of having Venus square Uranus. And it might be someone who does something that is very original, who is capable of perhaps being an original artist. And that would be Venus square Uranus, especially in the case of a woman who has that chart. A man who has Venus square Uranus, it might be the same, but Venus is a projectable planet, and so Venus square Uranus might reflect how a man sees women. It might be the mother, might be a wife or a girlfriend, and might be attracted to women who are independent-minded. So that is certainly a possibility. Now, Venus square Uranus can also be about money, and it can be about perhaps sudden changes of fortune, things happening with money quickly and unexpectedly. So if you've got Venus square Uranus, you might have to be a bit careful about money, and there might be moments in life where there are sudden disasters and perhaps sudden opportunities as well. So those are a few ideas about Venus square Uranus. And also, I suppose we should say that Venus is about aesthetics and about one's whole sense of what is beautiful. So someone with Venus square Uranus might have rather unusual ideas about what is beautiful. And I suppose if you want to be an artist, I would guess that Venus square Uranus might be quite a good aspect to have, though in some cases it might be perhaps a little disturbing. But I mean, I don't think it's a particularly bad aspect to have Venus square Uranus. I think it should, in theory, make one interesting. So let's start off by considering some charts of people with Venus square Uranus. And I suppose, as always, it's a sort of a question of the good, the bad, and the ugly, isn't it? So I suppose if we start with the ugly, I'm afraid I want to start with Adam Lanza. You remember Sandy Hook in 2012? that was December 2012, this massacre of elementary school children, which traumatized the nation. And here is his chart. And Adam Lanza had Venus square Uranus. I don't know his time of birth. So Adam Lanza was the perpetrator. If I remember rightly, he killed his mother. And, him and his mother were quite into guns, I think. And he killed his mother. Then he went off to this elementary school and he killed a lot of children. And there's a Venus square Uranus. I mean, it's a relatively close Venus square Uranus. And I think that what makes that square Uranus particularly strong is the fact that it's tied up with Neptune. Now, I don't know a great deal about Adam Lanza, but there may have been mother issues. I don't know. You would have thought there probably were mother issues in terms of him deciding to kill his mother first. So he has Venus square Uranus. I mean, Venus square Uranus may just be a general signifier of tumult, things just happening, a lack of stability. I think he was probably, I suppose, on the autistic spectrum. And I suppose in terms of the autistic spectrum, if you think about Venus square Uranus, now I should point out when I talk about the autistic spectrum, I don't really know what I'm talking about in a clinical sense, and so I'm be a bit careful with medical matters and astrology. I don't regard myself as a medical astrologer, but you can see the logic of Venus square Uranus being connected with the autistic spectrum. Autism, one of the manifestations of autism, is about a certain difficulty with dealing with the world out there. And you hear all these stories about having problems with eye contact, not being able to relate to people in a smooth way. And so Venus square Uranus might, in certain cases, indicate this. Now, absolutely must make this clear that if you've got Venus square Uranus, that doesn't mean you're autistic. That's not what it means. I'm just saying, with so many things in astrology, it's all about how it manifests. And you have to look at the overall situation and other factors. But certainly in Adam Lanza's case, Venus square Uranus could be about the autistic spectrum and just not being able to relate to people in an easy way. Things are a bit forced. And of course, in the vast majority of cases, people with autism do not become mass murderers. They very often find a constructive way to use their, I won't say disability because you can't say disability, more their I suppose, their different way of looking at the world. And so, though in this case, it worked out very badly. So that's Adam Lanza's chart. Now, one person who was kind of indirectly impacted by Adam Lanza in a financial sense was Alex Jones. So Alex Jones came up with a load of conspiracy theories about the Sandy Hook shootings, and he said sort of defamatory things about the parents of the victims, I think. And there was a lawsuit in which he's now has to pay out. I can't remember. It's just a huge amount of money. It's just a massive amount of money that he has to pay out. But he got really fixated on the hand of Sandy Hook stuff, and you can see that Alex Jones there's Alex Jones's Venus and there's his Uranus. So Alex Jones has a Venus square Uranus. Now maybe at some level with that Venus square Uranus, he was just kind of focused on this killing by someone else who had Venus square Uranus, and there may be something abrasive about it. He perhaps didn't know when to stop, maybe Venus square Uranus he didn't fully understand the implications of what he was doing in terms of going on and on and on about the Sandy Hook killings, and just going on into these sort of conspiracy theories, and he just kept going. And then, as far as I know, it's been, from a financial perspective, has been absolutely ruinous. Now, I don't want to suggest that Venus square Uranus is always a problem. Venus square Uranus is about being an individual, about doing things differently. And one person there are two people. I've talked about these two people before in some detail, born on the same day, who both have Venus square Uranus. One of them is a monster in a way, and the other is a real sort of a great humanitarian, and was a great humanitarian, and was able to think outside the box. So you had, on one hand, you had Adolf Eichmann, who was born on March 19th, 1906. I've talked about his chart quite a lot, so I don't really want to go into a great deal of detail about Adolf Eichmann. So he was one of the people who organized the Holocaust and transports to the camps. And he was kidnapped in Argentina in 1960, and he was hanged in 1962 by the Israelis. And Adolf Eichmann had Venus square Uranus. There's his Venus in Aries square Uranus in Capricorn. And it's a very prominent Venus square Uranus. Now, you could say, in his case, Venus square Uranus, even though he's a Pisces, Venus square Uranus, he did what he had to do. Venus square Neptune, Venus opposition Uranus. So remember, there's echoes there of Adam Lanza's chart, because Adam Lanza had Venus square Uranus-Neptune conjunction. But perhaps with Venus square Uranus, there's a certain heartlessness there. Venus square Uranus can be just focused on what we have to do, the technology of death and taking orders. That could be how Venus square Uranus works, just being detached from humanity. Now, I'm not saying, I don't think Adolf Eichmann, for as far as I know, was on the autistic spectrum, but he had the ability to detach himself, Venus square Uranus. So that would be a very negative dimension way in which Venus square Uranus could work. Now, there was another person born on March 19th, 1906, and this was Clara Breed. So Clara Breed is the opposite, kind of completely the opposite of Eichmann. So Clara Breed was I think she was a librarian in California, and like Eichmann, she was very concerned about transportation and people being transported to camps, but in a completely different way. So what upset Clara Breed was the rounding up of the Japanese at the beginning of the Second World War, and these Japanese Japanese Americans being sent off to internment camps, and she thought it was outrageous, and she made, even though she was, very often in America, public servants don't like to make a fuss. In terms of my observation of what's happening in my little part of America, they like to anyone who has any connection with public service. They feel threatened. They can't say anything. They can't complain. They can't. They don't want to put their name to any protest or any complaint about the way a city might be working. They're very sensitive about that. So you would have thought Clara Breed, as a librarian, would just ignore it and keep her nose down. But no, not at all. In spite of her being a public servant, as I understand it, being a librarian, she made a fuss about it. She wrote to people. She wrote to important people. She complained about it. She tried to stop the internment. She tried to reverse it. She wrote articles saying how outrageous it was. She arranged food parcels to be sent to people to Japanese Americans who'd been, particularly children, because I think as a librarian she'd had a lot of connections with children, Japanese American children, and she was really upset when they were all taken off to be interned. And so she was not afraid of making a fuss about it. So very, very completely opposite to Adolf Eichmann. Maybe because she was a woman and she was maybe a man would see Venus square Uranus about things happening on the outside and not feel much of a sense of an agency. But perhaps a woman with Venus square Uranus, it's her. She is going to be the one who is going to be original. So maybe in a female chart with Venus square Uranus, it's easier to be original and to do something that is different. So that's her chart, and I think that's an example of Venus square Uranus working in a pretty positive way. So another woman who has or had Venus square Uranus was Sinead O'Connor, so the singer. Now, clearly, Sinead O'Connor was not someone who was afraid of making a fuss, and she she was really upset about child abuse, particularly child abuse being perpetrated by the Catholic Church. She made these sort of public attacks on the Pope, which offended some people. Yeah, she did not care who she offended, and she was obviously very outspoken, and there is her Venus square Uranus. And of course, Venus is the planet of music, and it's a planet of singing, and it can be very talented. And so that may be how Venus square Uranus works. She was able to be creative and talented, but also she was not afraid of rocking a boat. Of course, it was a troubled life that she had. And, you can see that she was born 1966, Saturn-Uranus opposition, but there's Venus square Uranus, Venus square Saturn. So things were difficult for her, and I think she had mental health issues, and not quite sure why she died, how she died, but it's a difficult chart, but I suppose it's also a very creative chart. Now, there are two people, young people, who in their own way have become iconic, who were born on the same day, or anti-iconic. Two hate figures, for some, but other people think they're great. One on the left, one on the right. And they're both born on the same day. And the day they were both born was January the 3rd, 2003. And Greta was born on January the 3rd, 2003, Greta Thunberg. And not surprisingly, perhaps, we see that Greta has Venus square Uranus. So Greta Thunberg is this environmental activist who, she's not a child anymore. She's now 21, but she started as a child. And she was unusual. I believe that Greta Thunberg is maybe has Asperger's or is on the autistic spectrum. I think that's right. And she has Venus square Uranus. So that's sort of, going back to what we were saying with Adam Lanza. Of course, in her case, she was from her perspective and to many people's perspective, she was doing something positive. Of course, I understand that when you're listening, you might not regard Greta Thunberg as anything special, but she was able to be different. That's Venus square Uranus. So was she, with Venus square Uranus, perhaps having a certain difficulty dealing with other people? But she also, because of that, saw the world differently. She didn't want to follow the crowd. She did her one girl protest, didn't she, outside the Swedish parliament? So I think that is a very good example of Venus square Uranus working. And she became an icon for the environmental left. Now, someone else born on January the 3rd, 2003, who likewise has become an icon, but for people on the right, is Karl Rittenhouse. again, born on the same day as Greta Thunberg. So if you remember, he went to, was it Kenosha? Somewhere one of the lake states. I don't know the details, but he went there. He was kind of into law and order, and I think he wanted to be in the police, and he was into that, and he saw that there were riots, and he thought it'd be a good idea to go and protect businesses, and he took a gun with him. I mean, this was, I don't know when this was. Was this 2020? He's now 21, and he shot two people. He killed two people, and there was a court case, and he was acquitted. And so, for many people on the right, he was an icon, and he's still an icon. And I think that he stands up for right wing causes and gun rights and so forth. So again, whatever you think of him, he has Venus square Uranus. He did things differently. A normal teenager would stay at home, surely, would not decide to pick up a gun and go and defend a load of businesses, at least how he saw it. So that's how Venus square Uranus might be working. So I'm not going to look at any other people with Venus square Uranus. Okay, one other person, Russell Brand. There is Russell Brand's. Where's Russell Brand's Venus gone? So I think this is the right time for him. Russell Brand has Venus at 27 Cancer and Uranus at 28 Libra. Does seem very projectable, that Venus right on his 7th house cusp. That may say something about the kinds of relationships he gets involved in. You would have thought that his relations with other people are kind of can be quite tumultuous, I would have said. And with Venus square Uranus, I suppose he likes to be different in terms of aesthetics and how he likes to communicate, and also like in terms of the way he thinks. Assuming this chart is right, this timing is right, Uranus is exactly square his ascendant, so it's kind of, I know it's looking as if it might be in the 8th house, but if you were to set that chart up using the equal house system, of course Uranus would be in the 10th, and Uranus is actually in a very high profile position there. And if you were using the whole sign house system, Uranus would be in the 10th as well. So Venus square Uranus might be someone who really is able, or not just wants to get attention, but is able to get attention, and is able to do things differently, and is able to move beyond the mainstream. And Russell Brand certainly had a huge journey ideologically, as far as I can see, in terms of, I don't know, he used to be, very much associated with the left, but now things are changing. But there's Venus square Uranus. Venus square Uranus certainly wants to be different and wants to make a lot of noise. So those are a couple of people, well, quite a few people with Venus square Uranus. And as far as events are concerned, Nixon's resignation speech. Nixon resigned on August the 8th, 1974, and Venus was square Uranus at the time of his resignation. I mean, it was clearly a very big event. A president just resigning after the Watergate scandal. So Venus square Uranus might be a sense of shock, surprise, and just a feeling that something has come to an end. A particular relationship has come to an end. Of course, that is Nixon's relationship with the American people. But maybe just Venus square Uranus could be generally about a surprise, something we just weren't expecting. And another really negative event was the Munich Olympics. This is the opening ceremony of the Munich Olympics in 1972. So the Munich Olympics in 1972 is infamous for the attack by a Palestinian group, the Black September, on the Israeli delegation, in which many of them, they were held hostage, many of them were killed. It was just a big mess. And so at the time of the opening ceremony of the Munich Olympics, you can see Uranus is exactly on the midheaven, Saturn is exactly on the IC. So, sorry, Uranus is exactly on the midheaven, Saturn is exactly on the descendant, and yeah, we have Venus square Uranus. So we can see that Venus square Uranus was really strongly configured there. And so that might, it's not just the fact that Venus was square Uranus, it was the fact that Uranus was on the midheaven at the beginning of the opening ceremony, and Saturn was on the descendant. I suppose you could throw in Chiron as well on the IC. So the Munich Olympics started badly. That beginning chart is really rather difficult. I mean, if you go to the Paris Olympics, it's not as bad. I mean, Venus is kind of square Uranus at the beginning of the Paris Olympics. There's Venus, there's Uranus, but it's not exact. And so I think there are still going to be some events in the Paris Olympics, but I don't think it's quite as dramatic. Though still, I think there are still big causes for concern with the Paris Olympics. Looking at other things going on, NATO was ratified with Venus square Uranus, so NATO came into being, I suppose, for an alliance, a military alliance. There you've got Venus square Uranus, wanting to bring countries together, but Venus square Uranus, it's that is, Venus, I suppose, this was when it was ratified in Congress. So I suppose you could say, from that perspective, Venus would represent the United States' allies and United States' international relations. So square Uranus, this might have been quite a dramatic thing for the United States to become part of a military alliance. And Nazi Germany, Hitler came to power on January the 30th, 1933, and Venus is on the midheaven, square Uranus. So this angular Venus square Uranus, I suppose Venus in Capricorn, some people might see it as being victory. Venus is about victory, that's what it is, success, but almost particularly military victory. But that Venus on the midheaven, square Uranus, is the drama, but not the fact that it's opposition Pluto. So you've got, you could just say there's a Uranus-Pluto square, and Venus is just triggering this square. So that might be how Venus square Uranus is working. Now, I just wanted to quickly mention the Venus square Uranus that's coming up. I did want to mention, this August the 2nd thing. So August the 2nd, there is Venus square Uranus, and here is Venus. Sorry, I've called this Venus conjunct Uranus. That's misleading, isn't it? Let me just turn this into Venus square Uranus, just so that doesn't create any confusion. There, Venus square Uranus. So you can see that here Uranus is conjunct Algol, Venus is square Uranus, and so that's a moment of exactitude. This chart is set for London. I suppose I should relocate it to Paris because everyone's worried about the Paris Olympics. So let's just relocate that to France, might as well. I don't think it's going to make a great deal of difference. But, there's that Venus square Uranus. And so I think that Venus square Uranus on August the 2nd it could be difficult because Uranus is conjunct Algol. So Venus is very much affected by that Uranus energy. So we might, in a way, see some of the drama that we had around the time of the Trump assassination attempt, the drama coming back. So don't think necessarily that, it's going to be a quiet week, Venus square Uranus. It's because Uranus is conjunct Algol. So I do think that could be difficult. Now, August the 2nd is an anniversary. I mean, this is not necessarily about Venus square Uranus. It is about the death of Warren Harding. So here is the horoscope of Warren Harding. Was elected in 2020 and he died in office in 2023. So looking at so Warren Harding was a Scorpio. I think we have a time of birth for him. So here's Warren Harding's chart. He was elected in 1920 and he died in 1923. And he died, in fact, on August the 2nd, 2023. And I just wanted to quickly look at his transits. As I've recently mentioned, Warren Harding, I'm sort of kind of moving away from my theme here, but on the outer wheel, we have the positions of the planets at the time of Warren Harding's death. And I mentioned this before, but Warren Harding, at the time of his death, there was Sun square Saturn. And so Jupiter was exactly on his Sun, exactly conjunct his Sun. And the Sun was square his Sun. So I think that was a very obvious and clear significator of death. Just a reminder that Jupiter can indicate death. It's about a release, and I believe his death was quite straightforward. No, I mean he was sick. He was in San Francisco. I think he had some gastroenteritis or something. I think he had a moment of pain, and then he just died. And you can see that South Node, it was on his ascendant. The moon was on his South Node at the time of his death, but most importantly, he had Jupiter conjunct his Sun. So that's Warren Harding, and August the 2nd, which I think is going to be a bad day anyway. I think it's a difficult day, but it is the anniversary of Warren Harding's death. It's the 101st anniversary of Warren Harding's death. I mean, I'm not saying that Joe Biden is going to resign, but it's just interesting. We've got Nixon's resignation took place on August the 8th, 1974, and there it is. I've just shown you that. That's his resignation speech, August the 8th, 1974. And so we suddenly had a new president, Gerald Ford. Then we had August the 2nd, on Friday, we had the anniversary of Warren Harding's death. So, there's a certain precedent for early August. I mean, okay, it's a sample of two, but if Biden's going to go, if Biden's going to resign, I would have thought now is the time to do it. He's going to have to do it before the convention, surely. I would have thought, but I don't think he will, because I think, not from an astrological point of view, I think his wife really wants to stay in the White House as long as possible. But as I discussed in my previous video, Biden talked about, in his speech, he talked about self-sacrifice and doing what was right for the country. Well, if he wanted to give Kamala the absolute best chance of winning in November, then he would be completely selfless and would resign. And there is some precedent here for presidents resigning and dying in early August. So those are a few thoughts about Venus square Uranus. And now I want to look at the I Ching. So just a reminder with the I Ching, if you don't want your I Ching to be read, you can just stop. You can just stop watching a video. It's okay. You can watch something else. I won't be offended. So, I asked the question with the I Ching, and I will be looking at this question from four perspectives: general perspective, from a perspective of money, from a perspective of career, and from a perspective of relationships. So, I asked the question: what is the week starting on Monday, July the 29th, going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 58, which is the joyous. Sounds good, doesn't it? It's a completely weird hexagram, actually, in terms of it kind of being misleading, because it sounds so good. The joyous, it's about water, it's about the lake. That's a lake on the top, lake on the bottom, sort of double lake. And instinctively you might think that it is about being able to enjoy yourself, and there certainly is a free flow of emotion here, and that's the kind of week it's going to be. A lot of emotions flowing. It's easy to just pick up on the vibe and to just go with the flow. But it's not as simple as that. Greg Winkup, in his translation of the I Ching, he doesn't call it the joyous. I think he calls it something like stand straight or standing straight or something like that. You've got to be straight. And you kind of see it like, I don't know, I remember when I was 6, I went on holiday to Cornwall with my father, and my father took me through this. We were in the water. I don't know. The water was, it was over my knees, and I was with my father, and my father was, he was in this sort of exploring mode. But I remember we potentially almost got into trouble, I think, in the water, even though the water wasn't high, but the water was just running too fast. And I think it could have ended badly. I mean, it didn't. There was no sense of panic, but I do remember this water, as a 6-year-old, this strong tide against me, and one had to keep standing up. And if one didn't stand up, of course, something bad could have happened. And so when you've got a lot of water, when you've got a strong sort of flow of water, you've got to be careful. You've got to stand up straight, because you don't want to be knocked over by the water, because then anything can happen. And so Greg Winkup sees this hexagram in a very different way. So we have to be really very careful here. We don't want to get all tied up with, we don't want to get overwhelmed by what's going on. We have to be independent. And yes, we do have to stand up straight. And this hexagram has 2 moving lines. And the moving lines are, the second line moves and the 5th line moves. Second line moves is about discipline. It's suggesting that we're surrounded by inferior people. Just remember, inferior people, the I Ching way of looking at inferior, somehow people who are below us, and in the hierarchy perhaps, or perhaps people who have, perhaps have not such a refined view as we do. But anyway, we're surrounded by these people, and these people just want to have fun, and they want to go with the flow, and perhaps they want to spend money, and they want to do other stuff. I don't know. It depends on your company. Maybe in certain circumstances, maybe they want to drink and take drugs. I don't know. It depends. But they have all sorts of things they want to do, and it's all a waste of time. And at best, it's a waste of time. At worst, it could be quite dangerous. But we have to stand straight. We have to resist the temptation, and it does look as if we are going to be able to resist this, and so it should be okay. But aware, be very aware of negative influences, and do what you feel is right. Do not go away. Do not flow with the tide. And then the fifth line moves. Now this is another thing that's completely weird about this hexagram. In the I Ching, the fifth line is always tends to be fortunate. And the joyous is, overall, I think it's a fairly fortunate hexagram. But the fifth line in joyous is not fortunate. It's warning us of dangerous elements. We've already had dangerous elements in the second line, but there are dangerous elements everywhere. And we need to really make a special effort to stay away from these dangerous elements. And further, it is saying that trust is a bad thing. Trust is no good. Don't trust anyone. If you put trust in someone, it's talking about, in fact, the Legge translation of this line says, trusting in one who would injure. So trusting someone who could hurt us. So that is a real danger there. And it may actually work both ways even. It may be that we need to be careful about other people trusting us. Can we be trusted? And the answer is possibly not. So forget trust. It's a bad word this week, at least at the beginning of this week. And because of these moving lines, we get a movement to a different hexagram. And the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 51, which is thunderbolts. That's Greg Winkup's translation. The Wilhelm translation is the arousing. Things suddenly happen. Thunderbolts. And there is a great panic. And what's going on in the world? Maybe we can see maybe the world is falling apart. Venus square Uranus on Friday. Uranus conjunct Algol, square Venus. The world is a difficult, complicated place, and then thunderbolts. But it tells us this hexagram, it has this image of the sacrificial spoon with incense in it, and it's saying the sacrificial spoon doesn't fall, it doesn't drop the incense. So we should be okay. In spite of all the drama around us, we can just keep our cool. However difficult things are in the world out there, we're going to be okay. So don't panic. But there is some kind of drama that we need to be ready for. Okay, so that's a general view. And so now we can look at the I Ching from a financial perspective. And so, as you can imagine, from a financial perspective, we have to be very careful this week. It is not a time to be listening too hard to other people. There's going to be a lot of pressure on us to spend money, I think. The pressure could come from us, the joyous, go with the flow. Just, it's nice, it's the summer. It's the summer if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. Let's spend some money, let's be happy. If other people want to spend money, other people maybe want to go to expensive restaurants, maybe go on expensive holidays, whatever they want to do, and go with the flow. And it's bad. But with the second line moving, it's saying, well, we can, in the first instance, I think we can resist that pressure. And it's, it could come from many different places. This pressure could come from ourselves, it could come from other people, it could come from our family, but we just have to resist that pressure. And we should be able to do it. And then we get that fifth line. Financially, we are starting to move into a situation where we can't trust anyone. Literally, almost. I mean, not. Okay, sometimes there's people we can trust, someone who really knows what they're doing, but by and large, you can't trust people with money. You can't trust people with financial advice, and as soon as you put your trust in someone, they can let you down, and we don't know what their intentions are. So I think with money, it's really very simple. You just have to be really, really careful. And it's going to be difficult because the temptations could be overwhelming to put your trust in someone, but it's just not a good idea. And we've got these two moving lines, and so this hexagram moves to Thunderbolt. So at the end of the week, there could be financially a surprise, a shock, something happening that we weren't expecting. We might feel that we're in the process of, some financial loss maybe about to unfold. But I think it's important not to panic. If we do keep our cool, remember the spoon carrying the incense, we don't drop it. So it might seem that you may get information or events happening outside you which seem to threaten your financial position. But if you keep your cool, and particularly if you haven't trusted anyone, you've really been self-reliant, then I think it should be okay. But overall, it goes without saying that this week just be so careful with money, because trust is I'm afraid trust is a dirty word right now. Turning to business and career, it's a similar picture. I think that one starts a week thinking that it depends on the situation, doesn't it? Of course, you may not have a job, career may not be important, you may have retired, in which case perhaps this section isn't maybe relevant to you. But if you are in a job, there may be perhaps a certain complacency here. If you're looking for a job, you might just feel that you just go about things in the right way. In terms of your business, everything seems to be flowing and so on. But I think very quickly you'll start to see that there could be some problems. There'll be pressure to do things that aren't particularly wise. And so, for example, there may be temptations to slack off, not to put so much work into something. Maybe there are other things that you want to watch, want to consider. I don't know. Maybe you want to watch the Olympics. I don't know why, but if you were to watch the Olympics, that's just more exciting than finding new business, more exciting than going into work. It's important to, as Wynkoop would say, to stand straight. If you've got a job, you need to give it everything you've got, and you need to not listen too much to other people. And particularly if there is a sort of a workplace environment where other people are sort of relaxing and they don't really want to focus on things and they want to do something else, I think you need to resist that temptation. And if you have your own business, don't be tempted to take time off. Your family might say, well, what about there are other things in life apart from business? But no, you've got to really focus on what matters and not give in to temptation. And with that fifth line moving, there may come a point where you feel that you need to trust someone. They say it will work out. And it goes without saying, of course, if you trust anyone, it's not going to work out. Anyone that sort of says, trust me, you're in trouble. That goes without saying. So be very self-sufficient in terms of whatever your relationship to work is, and don't assume that someone else is going to sort it out for you. And I suppose that particularly applies if you're in terms of business. And I suppose going back to the money thing, don't just assume that someone's going to pay you. You cannot trust anyone, and I think it's not. It's not necessarily because people are necessarily out to get you, or because it's a competitive situation. It just may be that some people are just not fit to give advice. So I think it is a potentially difficult situation in terms of work. But this hexagram does move, and it moves to hexagram 51, which is thunderbolt. So perhaps towards the end of the week in a working environment, there could be a surprise, a shock. You perhaps realize you realize now that things were actually much more difficult than they appeared to be at the beginning of the week. But if you have been careful and you haven't trusted anyone, then whatever shocks happen at the end of the week, I think you'll be able to manage them. At first, might seem devastating, but I think actually it will be okay if you can just keep your cool. And finally, there is relationships. 58, the joyous, is in a way the perfect hexagram for relationships, isn't it? It's the joyous. It's about water. It's about emotion. It's about everything flowing. So if you're in a relationship, the week may start off as if it's working pretty well. And when I say relationship, I'm talking about any kind of relationship. I'm not talking about just romance, business partnership, just anything, just any kind of relationship you might be in. And it starts off quite well, and things do seem to be flowing, but then they start flowing too much. There's just too much emotion here. And I think that, I suppose this is particularly the case if you're in a new relationship. You have to consider, who is the other person? Can he really be trusted? And are you just going to go with the flow? Because if you go with the flow on someone else's suggestion, you could go with the flow over Niagara Falls. That's not really what you want to do, is it? So you need possibly to hold back. I mean, in fact, in some respects this week, you probably would be better off not being in a relationship or giving relationships a break, possibly, because I think relationships actually are quite a dangerous area to be in. As I said, especially if it's a new relationship or you're trying to get involved in a new relationship. A lot of emotion flowing. It could be your own emotion flowing. And I suppose on the positive note, if there is something positive to be said here, if you're having a relationship with someone you don't know about, you don't know anything about them. As I said, it could be any kind of relationship. You may quickly realize that they're not actually anyone you want to deal with. They may just at some level be at a kind of not your kind of person. Perhaps they don't have your kind of integrity. So there is perhaps a bit of a silver lining here. And as the week progresses, as we move from the second line to the fifth line moving is really warning of dangerous elements, people you should have nothing to do with. And perhaps that's relating to new people who you might want to be in touch with, but people are a problem. If you meet someone for the first time and they seem to be a really nice person and you're going with the flow, it could go wrong. It is not a time to trust anyone. Because if you trust someone, it will backfire. And it could be the case at the same time that if someone trusts you, you let them down. So it's just very important not to trust people, and not to put people in a situation where they trust you either. So avoid any kind of trust. I know we're supposed to think that trust is a good thing, but this week trust is not a good thing. So this hexagram, the joyous, it does move to thunderbolts. So in terms of relationships, by the end of the week, there may be a little bit of a shock. You may see someone for what they're really like, and and that might be really upsetting, perhaps. I'm probably not talking about someone you've been with for a long, long time, more perhaps a newer relationship, but seeing someone for what they're really like, there is that shock, but don't worry about it too much. I think you will survive the shock and perhaps benefit from it. Okay, you see someone for what they're really like. That's great. Might be a surprise, And of course, you might see someone's behavior, type of behavior for the first time, but you can deal with it. And perhaps you're going to just have greater awareness of what someone is like, and that will allow you to make the right decision about where you proceed in the immediate future. Okay, that's my forecast and general statements about the week ahead, the week starting on Monday, July the 29th. I hope you found this video of some use. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be really grateful if you were to like it, and if you're not subscribed, I'd be super, super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you again very soon.